I'm standing in an airport at 3 in the morning, and my hands won't stop shaking. My daughter is blowing up my phone telling me I'm making the biggest mistake of my life. I'm 78 years old, and I'm about to board a plane alone for the first time ever. Part of me wants to turn around right now and go back to my safe, quiet, invisible life. But here's what nobody tells you about getting older. They expect you to just fade away. To stop wanting things. To accept that your life is basically over and you're just waiting around to die. For decades, I believed them. I became so invisible in my own life that when I looked at photos from the last 30 years, I realized something terrifying: I'm not smiling in any of them. Not really. My eyes are empty. Like I'd already disappeared. So I did something everyone said was crazy. I booked a ticket to a place I'd always dreamed of seeing. No family. No schedule. Just me. And what happened next shocked everyone, including myself. Because when you spend 78 years putting everyone else first, finally choosing yourself feels like jumping off a cliff. What happens when you get lost on a hiking trail with no phone signal and no one knows where you are? How do you explain to your children that you're not having a breakdown, you're actually waking up for the first time? And what does it feel like to dance with a stranger at 78, in a bar you never would have entered a month ago? This is the story of how I almost turned around at that gate. How I faced every fear I'd been carrying for decades. And how I discovered that it's never, ever too late to stop being invisible. Because freedom doesn't have an age limit. And neither does regret. I'm standing in an airport terminal at 3 in the morning, and my hands won't stop shaking. My suitcase feels like it weighs 1,000 pounds. My phone keeps buzzing with messages from my daughter telling me this is crazy, that I should come home, that women my age don't do this. I'm 78 years old, and I'm about to board a plane alone for the first time in my entire life. Part of me wants to turn around right now. But there's another part, a part one barely recognize, that's whispering something I haven't heard in decades. Keep going. So I take a breath, silence my phone, and walk toward the gate. What happens next will change everything I thought I knew about myself. 3 months ago, I buried my husband of 52 years. Harold wasn't a bad man. He provided for our family, showed up to school events, paid the bills on time. But somewhere along the way, I disappeared. Not physically. I was always there, in the kitchen making dinner, folding laundry, scheduling doctor's appointments, keeping the house running like a well-oiled machine. But the woman I used to be, the one who dreamed of seeing the ocean at sunrise or dancing until midnight, she vanished so gradually I didn't even notice. After the funeral, after the last casserole dish was returned and the sympathy cards stopped coming, I sat in our house and felt the silence press down on me like a weight. My children called occasionally, but they had their own lives now, their own families, their own problems. I was expected to settle into widowhood gracefully. Join a book club maybe. Volunteer at the library. Fade quietly into the background of my own existence. One night, I couldn't sleep. I went through old photo albums, the kind with actual printed pictures, not the digital ones everyone uses now. I flipped through decades of images. Birthday parties. Graduations. Holidays. And I realized something that made my chest tighten. In almost every photo from the last 30 years, I'm not smiling. Not really. There's a polite expression on my face, the kind you put on when you know someone's taking a picture. But my eyes are empty. Tired. Somewhere along the way, I'd become a ghost in my own life. That's when I decided. I was going to take a trip. Alone. Not to visit family or attend some obligation. Just me, going somewhere I'd always wanted to see but never had the courage to ask for. I chose a small coastal town I'd read about years ago in a magazine. The kind of place with weathered docks and sunrise markets and the smell of salt air. Harold would have hated it. Too quiet, he would have said. Nothing to do. Which is exactly why I needed to go. When I told my daughter, she acted like I'd announced I was joining the circus. Mom, you can't be serious. What if something happens? What if you fall? What if you get lost? The questions came rapid fire, each one wrapped in concern but edged with something else. Judgment. Disbelief that I could function without supervision. My son was worse. He barely looked up from his phone when I mentioned it, then said flatly that it sounded irresponsible. That I was too old to be gallivanting around alone. Gallivanting. As if wanting one adventure after a lifetime of service was childish. I almost cancelled 3 times. The doubts crept in late at night. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was being foolish. Maybe women my age were supposed to accept their limitations and stay put. But then I'd remember that photo album. Those empty eyes. And I'd book the ticket again. The morning I left, I didn't tell anyone. I just packed a small suitcase, called a cab, and left a note on the kitchen counter. It said simply, "Gone to find myself. Back in 2 weeks." I turned off my phone as the cab pulled away. The airport was overwhelming. It had been decades since I'd flown, and everything had changed. Self-check-in kiosks. Security lines that required removing shoes and belts. People rushing past with headphones in, staring at screens, moving with a purpose I couldn't match. I felt slow. Conspicuous. Every time I fumbled with my boarding pass or asked a question, I could feel eyes on me. The old woman who doesn't understand how things work. At the gate, I sat in a plastic chair and watched families board. Young couples holding hands. Business travelers typing furiously on laptops. A mother with 3 small children juggling bags and snacks. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they belonged. And then there was me. Alone. 78. About to do something that terrified me. That's when the shaking started. My hands trembled so badly I had to clasp them together. What was I doing? What if my daughter was right? What if I had a medical emergency and no one was there to help? What if I got lost in a strange place and couldn't find my way back? The fear was physical, a tightness in my chest that made it hard to breathe. A voice came over the loudspeaker announcing boarding for my flight. I didn't move. I sat there, frozen, while other passengers lined up. I could leave right now. Go home. Pretend this never happened. No one would have to know. But then I thought about going back to that empty house. To those silent rooms filled with someone else's choices. To a life where I'd already become invisible. And I stood up. My legs were shaky, but I stood up. I grabbed my suitcase and walked to the line. When the flight attendant scanned my boarding pass and smiled at me, I smiled back. A real smile. Maybe the first genuine one in years. I was doing this. I was actually doing this. As I settled into my window seat, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't confidence exactly. It was more like a tiny spark of defiance. A whisper that said maybe, just maybe, I still had some life left to live on my own terms. The plane lifted off, and I watched the city shrink below me. Everything I'd known for 78 years getting smaller and smaller until it disappeared into clouds. For a moment, I felt untethered. Weightless. Terrified. Free. The woman sitting next to me was probably in her 40s, absorbed in a novel. She glanced at me once, politely, then returned to her book. I wanted to tell her what this moment meant. That I was on my first solo trip. That I was scared and exhilarated and felt more alive than I had in decades. But I stayed quiet. Some things are too big for small talk with strangers. Instead, I closed my eyes and let myself feel everything. The hum of the engine. The slight turbulence. The knowledge that for the next 2 weeks, no one needed me to be anything but myself. When the flight attendant offered me a drink, I ordered wine. Not because I particularly wanted it, but because I could. Because no one was there to raise an eyebrow or suggest I shouldn't. Such a small act of rebellion, but it felt monumental. We landed just after noon. The airport was smaller than the one I'd left, and I navigated it more easily this time. I'd arranged for a rental car, another first. I hadn't driven anywhere unfamiliar in years. Harold always drove on trips. I signed the papers with hands that still trembled slightly, then stood in the parking lot staring at the compact sedan. It's just a car, I told myself. You've been driving for 60 years. But this was different. This was me, alone, responsible for getting myself to an unknown destination. I programmed the address into the GPS and started driving. The roads were narrow and winding, cutting through forests that opened occasionally to glimpses of the ocean. The late afternoon sun filtered through the trees, and something in my chest loosened. I rolled down the window and let the wind whip through my hair. When was the last time I'd felt wind in my hair? When had I last driven with the windows down, music playing, going somewhere just because I wanted to? I couldn't remember. The town was exactly as I'd imagined it. Small. Weathered. Beautiful in an unpretentious way. Pastel-colored buildings lined the main street. Fishing boats bobbed in the harbor. The air smelled like salt and something else, something I couldn't quite name. Possibility maybe. I checked into a small bed and breakfast run by a woman probably 20 years younger than me. She welcomed me warmly, showed me to a room with a view of the water, and told me breakfast was served at 8. When she left, I stood at the window and stared at the ocean. The sun was setting, painting the water in shades of orange and pink. Tears started falling before I even realized I was crying. Not sad tears. Something else. Relief maybe. Or grief for all the years I'd waited to see something this beautiful. I unpacked slowly, hanging my clothes in the small closet, arranging my toiletries in the bathroom. Everything felt deliberate. Significant. This was my space. No one else's. Just mine. That night, I ate dinner alone at a small restaurant overlooking the harbor. The hostess asked if I was waiting for someone, and I said no, just me. She smiled and led me to a table by the window. Eating alone in a restaurant felt strange at first. I was hyper-aware of the other diners, certain they were all watching the old woman by herself. But gradually, I relaxed. I ordered what I wanted without asking anyone else's opinion. I ate slowly, savoring each bite. I watched the boats in the harbor and the tourists walking along the pier. And I felt something I hadn't felt in so long I'd almost forgotten what it was called. Peace. After dinner, I walked along the waterfront. The air was cool, and I pulled my sweater tighter around my shoulders. Other people were out too, couples holding hands, families with children chasing each other, groups of friends laughing. Everyone seemed to belong to someone. Except me. But for the first time, that didn't feel like a deficit. It felt like freedom. I found a bench and sat watching the waves. The ocean was dark now, almost black, with just the reflection of the moon cutting a silver path across the surface. I thought about Harold. About our life together. Had I loved him? Yes, in a way. But had I been happy? I'd never let myself ask that question before. It felt disloyal somehow. But sitting there alone in the dark, I could finally admit the truth. I'd been content. Comfortable. But happy? No. I'd been too busy taking care of everyone else to even consider my own happiness. The next morning, I woke early. The sun wasn't up yet, but I could see the first hints of light on the horizon. I dressed quickly and walked down to the beach. The sand was cool under my feet. I took off my shoes and let the water lap at my ankles. It was cold, shocking, and perfect. I walked for an hour as the sun rose, painting the sky in impossible colors. Other early risers nodded as they passed, offering quiet good mornings. No one asked why I was alone. No one seemed to think it was strange. I was just another person enjoying the morning. Just another human being taking up space in the world. Back at the bed and breakfast, I ate breakfast alone. Fresh fruit and pastries and coffee so good it felt like a luxury. The owner asked if I had plans for the day, and I realized I didn't. No schedule. No obligations. No one waiting for me to do anything. The freedom of it was almost disorienting. I could do anything. Go anywhere. Be anyone. So I decided to explore. I drove along the coast, stopping at overlooks and small beaches. I visited a lighthouse and climbed the stairs to the top, my legs protesting but managing. From up there, the world looked different. Vast. Full of possibilities I'd never noticed before. At a small cafe, I struck up a conversation with a young woman working behind the counter. She was maybe 25, with bright eyes and easy laugh. She asked if I was visiting, and I told her it was my first solo trip. Her face lit up. "That's amazing," she said. "I want to do that someday. Travel alone. Figure out who I am without everyone else's opinions weighing me down." I looked at her, so young, so full of possibility, and felt something twist in my chest. "Don't wait," I told her. "Don't wait until you're 78 to start living for yourself." She laughed, probably thinking I was exaggerating. But I wasn't. I was speaking from decades of experience, from a lifetime of putting myself last. She poured me another coffee on the house, and we talked for nearly an hour. About dreams and fear and the weight of other people's expectations. When I finally left, she hugged me. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea how much I needed to hear that today." But I did know. Because I'd needed to hear it too, for most of my life, and no one had ever said it. That conversation stayed with me. As I drove back to the bed and breakfast, I kept thinking about that young woman. About the dreams she was already afraid to chase. About how early we learn to make ourselves small. To accommodate. To sacrifice. I'd spent 78 years doing that. And what did I have to show for it? Adult children who called out of obligation. A house full of memories that weren't entirely happy. A life that felt more like a collection of duties than actual living. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I went to a bar. Not a quiet wine bar or a restaurant with a bar area. An actual bar with live music and people dancing and laughter spilling out onto the street. I almost turned around 3 times. What was I thinking? Women my age don't go to bars alone. But that voice, the one that had been whispering since the airport, spoke up again. Why not? Who says you can't? I walked in and ordered a drink. The bartender didn't look at me strangely. He just made my drink and slid it across the bar with a smile. The music was loud, some kind of folk rock band with a fiddle and guitar. People were dancing, moving with a kind of unself-conscious joy I'd forgotten existed. A man around my age approached and asked if he could sit next to me. I said yes, surprised. We introduced ourselves. His name was William, and he was visiting from 2 states over. His wife had passed away a year ago, and he'd decided to spend his retirement traveling to all the places they'd always talked about but never visited. "We're here anyway," he said with a sad smile. "Might as well see what we can while we still can." We talked for hours. About loss and regret and the strange experience of suddenly being alone after decades of partnership. About how invisible older people become, especially women. About the fear of trying new things when society has already decided you're past your prime. He told me about learning to cook for the first time at 73, about taking a pottery class and being the oldest person there by decades. About slowly figuring out who he was outside of being someone's husband. I told him about the photo album. About the empty eyes. About this trip and how terrified I'd been to take it. "We're brave," he said simply. "We're braver than we give ourselves credit for." When the band took a break, he stood and extended his hand. "Dance with me," he said. I hesitated. I hadn't danced in years. Decades, maybe. But then I thought about that young woman in the cafe. About not waiting. About grabbing moments of joy when they appear. So I took his hand. We danced slowly, awkwardly at first, then with more confidence. The music was gentle, a slow folk song about rivers and time. Other couples danced around us, but I barely noticed them. I was focused on this moment, on the feeling of being held gently by someone who understood loss and courage in equal measure. When the song ended, we returned to our seats. He bought me another drink, and we talked until the bar started closing. He walked me back to the bed and breakfast, a perfect gentleman. At the door, he asked if I'd like to have breakfast together the next morning. I said yes. We exchanged phone numbers, and he promised to text me in the morning. As I climbed the stairs to my room, I felt something I'd almost forgotten. Giddiness. Like a teenager after a first date. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her cheeks were flushed. Her eyes were bright. She looked alive. When did I stop looking alive? When did duty and obligation drain all the color from my face? I didn't have answers. But standing there in that small bathroom in a town I'd never been to, I made a decision. I wasn't going back to being invisible. Whatever it took, however hard it was, I was going to keep feeling this alive. The next few days were a revelation. William and I spent time together exploring the town, sharing meals, talking about everything and nothing. But I also spent time alone, and that felt just as important. I took long walks on the beach at sunrise. I sat in cafes reading books I'd bought on impulse. I tried foods I'd never tasted before. I stayed up late watching the stars and slept in when I felt like it. One afternoon, I decided to hike a trail that led to a viewpoint overlooking the ocean. The woman at the bed and breakfast warned me it was steep, that maybe I should consider the easier path. But I was tired of easy. Tired of safe. I wanted to challenge myself. The hike was harder than I expected. My knees ached. My breathing became labored. Twice I had to stop and rest. But I kept going. When I finally reached the top, the view took my breath away. The ocean stretched endlessly in every direction. The sky was a brilliant blue. The world felt enormous and full of possibility. I stood there for a long time, just breathing, just being. A younger couple arrived shortly after me. They nodded politely, then the woman said, "That's quite a hike, isn't it?" Especially for, she trailed off, clearly embarrassed. Especially for someone my age, I finished for her, smiling. She blushed, but I wasn't offended. "Yes," I said. "It is. But I made it. And the view is worth every step." On my way back down the trail, I took a wrong turn. The path forked, and I chose the wrong direction. I didn't realize my mistake until I'd been walking for 20 minutes and nothing looked familiar. My phone had no signal. The sun was starting to sink lower in the sky. For the first time since arriving, I felt genuine fear. What if I couldn't find my way back? What if I got injured out here and no one knew where I was? My daughter's warnings echoed in my head. This is exactly what she'd been afraid of. The old woman getting lost and helpless in an unfamiliar place. I forced myself to breathe slowly. To think clearly. I backtracked carefully, paying attention to landmarks. A distinctive rock formation. A fallen tree. Slowly, I found my way back to the fork in the path. I chose the correct direction this time and eventually emerged from the trail tired, dirty, and shaking slightly. But I'd done it. I'd gotten lost and found my way back. Alone. That night, I called my daughter for the first time since leaving. She answered on the first ring, her voice tight with worry and anger. "Where have you been? I've been trying to reach you for days. Do you have any idea how worried I've been?" I let her vent for a few minutes, then I told her where I was and what I'd been doing. There was a long silence. Then she said, in a softer voice, "Are you okay, Mom? Are you really okay?" And I realized she wasn't just asking about my physical safety. She was asking if I was losing my mind, if grief had broken me in some fundamental way. "I'm more than okay," I told her. "I'm happy." Another silence. Then, quietly, "When are you coming home?" "Soon," I said. "But I'm different now. I need you to understand that. I'm not the same person who left." The last few days of my trip, I spent a lot of time reflecting. I met William for coffee and told him about getting lost on the trail. He laughed, then said, "That's the thing about traveling alone at our age. Everyone assumes we're fragile, that we can't handle difficulties. But we've survived decades of life. We're tougher than anyone gives us credit for." He was right. I'd raised children and nursed sick parents and weathered financial struggles and stayed in a marriage that was more routine than romance. I'd survived loss and disappointment and the slow erosion of my own identity. Getting lost on a hiking trail was nothing compared to that. On my last night, I took myself out to dinner at the nicest restaurant in town. I wore a dress I'd packed on impulse, something I'd bought years ago and never worn because Harold thought it was too flashy. I sat alone at a table with a view of the harbor and ordered the most expensive item on the menu. I ate slowly, savoring every bite, drinking wine and watching the sun set over the water. Other diners glanced at me occasionally, but I didn't care anymore what they thought. Let them wonder about the old woman dining alone. Let them make assumptions. I knew the truth. I wasn't alone. I was with myself. And that was enough. The flight home felt different than the flight out. I wasn't scared anymore. I was ready. Ready to face my life with new eyes. Ready to set boundaries I'd never dared to set before. Ready to stop making myself small to accommodate everyone else. My daughter picked me up from the airport. She hugged me tightly, longer than usual, and I could feel her relief. She'd been genuinely worried, I realized. Not just annoyed or judgmental, but scared that something had happened to me. On the drive home, she asked questions. "What did you do? Where did you stay? Did you meet anyone?" I answered honestly. I told her about William and the bar and dancing and getting lost on the trail. She listened quietly, and I couldn't read her expression. When we pulled into my driveway, she turned to me and said, "You seem different." "I am," I replied. She nodded slowly. "Is that a good thing?" she asked. I looked at my house, the one I'd lived in for decades, and felt a strange mix of familiarity and distance. "Yes," I said. "It's a very good thing." She helped me carry my suitcase inside, and we sat in the kitchen drinking tea. She told me about her kids, about work, about the normal rhythms of her life. And then she said, "I was angry when you left. I thought you were being selfish and reckless. But now I think I understand. You needed this." I squeezed her hand. "I did," I said. "More than I realized." She left eventually, promising to call tomorrow. After she was gone, I walked through the house. It looked the same but felt different. Or maybe I was different, and that changed how I saw everything. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room looking at the same photo albums I'd looked at before the trip. The images were the same, but I saw them differently now. All those years of invisible labor. All those moments of putting everyone else first. I'd thought that was love. That sacrifice was the same as devotion. But looking at those photos now, I could see the truth. I'd disappeared because I'd chosen to. Not all at once, but gradually, one small concession at a time. And while I couldn't change the past, I could change what came next. Over the next few weeks, I made changes. Small ones at first. I started saying no to things I didn't want to do. I stopped answering phone calls during my morning walks. I signed up for a painting class, something I'd always wanted to try but never made time for. My children noticed. My son called to ask if I was feeling okay, his tone suggesting he thought I might be ill or experiencing some kind of late-life crisis. "I'm feeling better than I have in years," I told him honestly. That seemed to confuse him more than reassure him. My daughter was more supportive, though I could tell she was still processing this new version of her mother. One afternoon, she came over and found me looking at travel brochures. "Are you planning another trip?" she asked, surprise evident in her voice. "Maybe," I said. "There are a lot of places I want to see." She sat down next to me and started flipping through the brochures. "This one looks nice," she said, pointing to a photo of mountains and lakes. "Will you go alone again?" "Probably," I said. "Unless you want to come with me." She looked at me for a long moment. "I think I judged you," she said quietly. "When you left. I thought you were running away from grief or having some kind of breakdown. But you were actually running toward something, weren't you?" I nodded. I was running toward myself. We sat together in comfortable silence, and I felt something shift between us. She was seeing me as a person now, not just as her mother. Not just as the woman who was supposed to be endlessly available and accommodating. It was uncomfortable for both of us, but it was also necessary. A few months after my trip, I got a message from William. He was planning to visit the coast again and wondered if I'd like to meet him there. I said yes without hesitation. This time, I didn't tell my children until the day before I left. My daughter asked if this William was someone special. I thought about that. He was kind and interesting, and we enjoyed each other's company. But more than that, he represented possibility. He was proof that life didn't end at 70 or 80. That connection and joy and adventure were still possible. "He's a friend," I told her. "And yes, he's special." She smiled. "I'm glad you're happy, Mom." "I really am." And I could tell she meant it. The second trip was even better than the first. I wasn't scared this time. I knew I could handle whatever came up. William and I explored new places, tried new foods, laughed until our sides hurt. But I also spent time alone, and that felt just as important. I was learning to be comfortable in my own company, to enjoy solitude without mistaking it for loneliness. One evening, William and I sat on the beach watching the sunset. He asked what had changed for me since the first trip. "Everything," I said. "And nothing. The world is the same. But I'm different. And that makes all the difference." He nodded. That's how I felt after my wife died. Like I had to figure out who I was without her. It was terrifying and liberating at the same time. We talked about aging, about how society treats older people like they're already dead. Like we're just waiting around to actually die. "But we're not," he said. "We're still here. Still living. Still feeling. Still wanting things." I thought about the young woman in the cafe, about how early we learn to diminish ourselves. But I also thought about how it's never too late to unlearn those lessons. To reclaim the space we've been told we don't deserve. When I returned home this time, I felt settled in a way I hadn't before. I'd proven to myself that the first trip wasn't a fluke. That this new version of me wasn't temporary. I started planning more trips. I joined a local hiking group for seniors. I reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with over the years. I started painting regularly, terrible amateur paintings that brought me more joy than I expected. My children adjusted to this new normal. My daughter started asking about my trips, genuinely interested. My son remained somewhat bewildered but seemed to accept that his mother was not who he thought she was. And that was okay. They didn't need to understand every choice I made. They just needed to respect that they were my choices to make. Now, 6 months after that first solo trip, I'm sitting in my living room planning my next adventure. There's a writing workshop in the mountains I want to attend. A photography tour of a national park. So many possibilities. My phone rings. It's my daughter. "Hey Mom," she says. "I was thinking. What would you say if I came with you on your next trip? Not to keep an eye on you or anything. I just think it might be nice. To see you in this new element. To spend time together as adults, not just as mother and daughter." I smile, feeling my eyes prickle with unexpected tears. "I'd love that," I say. We talk for a while longer about logistics and timing. After we hang up, I sit quietly, letting the moment settle into my bones. This is what freedom feels like. Not the absence of connection or responsibility, but the presence of choice. The ability to say yes or no based on what I want, what I need, what brings me joy. I'm 78 years old. I spent most of my life making myself invisible. Accommodating everyone else's needs and dreams while my own withered from neglect. And then one day, I decided I'd had enough. I booked a ticket to a place I'd never been. I got on a plane alone. I faced my fears and discovered that on the other side of fear is not disaster but possibility. The world didn't end because I put myself first. My family didn't fall apart. In fact, we're closer now than we've been in years because they're finally seeing me as a whole person. Not just a role to be filled but a human being with desires and dreams and a life worth living. If you're watching this and you've been putting off your dreams, waiting for the right time or the right circumstances, let me tell you something. The right time is now. Whether you're 28 or 78 or any age in between. Life is happening right now, in this moment, and if you keep waiting for permission or for conditions to be perfect, you'll wake up one day and realize you missed it. You missed your own life. I almost did. I came so close to fading away completely, to becoming just a collection of other people's memories and expectations. But I caught myself. I grabbed my suitcase and got on that plane and gave myself permission to matter. To take up space. To be visible again. And it changed everything. I'm not saying it's easy. There are days when the old patterns try to reassert themselves. When someone asks me to do something and my automatic response is yes, even when I want to say no. But I'm getting better at it. Better at recognizing that my time and energy are finite and precious. Better at honoring myself the way I used to honor everyone else. So here's what I want you to take away from this. It's never too late. Whatever dream you've been putting off, whatever adventure you've been too scared to take, whatever version of yourself you've been hiding, it's not too late to bring it into the light. You are allowed to change. You are allowed to grow. You are allowed to become someone new at any age. I'm 78 years old, and I just took my first solo trip. I got lost and found myself. I faced fears I didn't know I had and discovered strengths I'd forgotten I possessed. I danced with a stranger and hiked until my legs ached and ate dinner alone without apologizing for taking up space. And I have no regrets. Only freedom. Only the profound relief of finally living authentically. If this story resonated with you, please leave a comment and tell me about a dream you've been putting off. What's stopping you? And what would it take for you to give yourself permission to go after it? I'd love to hear from you. And if you want to follow along on my future adventures, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. Because I'm just getting started, and trust me, there are more stories to come. Thank you for listening to mine. Thank you for letting me share this journey with you. And remember, the only person who can give you permission to live fully is you. So what are you waiting for? The world is still here. You're still here. That's all you need to begin.